Okay, so this is part 2 of our video here on disassembling and assembling your VSR 10. We're now going to assemble the hop-up back together with our barrel and bucking. And as you can see here, we have our bucking slid on right over top of the slit here. You can check on the inside, pressing down on this, making sure you have that little piece sticking out. That actually applies pressure to the BB. Once you have that in place, you are good to go with that. So now we have to actually get your hop-up chamber itself here, stick the barrel and bucking right on top. There's a little place for it. This is probably the easiest part, is just sticking that right on there, okay? Next thing you're going to want to do is take this little piece here with the spring, make sure that spring's in place, and we're going to have the spring facing towards me, and that little U piece of plastic shaped like a U, you want it right over top of the bucket on the right side here, and you want the little pointy piece actually on the side here. You're not going to be able to see it, but if you're taking apart your VSR 10, you'll know what I'm talking about here, and if you don't, just let me know if you have any questions. There's a little piece protruding. You want that to slide on the side that has a little slit there for it to slide back and forth, okay? Once you have that, you want to take the bottom piece here to your hop-up unit. You want to just stick that right underneath, and it should slide back and forth along the barrel, okay? Got that in place. You got your hop-up arm. Stick your hop-up arm right over that little hole there, as you can see. Hopefully I'm not going too fast for you. Alright, now we got that all set up. Make sure you didn't forget anything. Look it over, make sure everything's aligned. Now you'll notice on the top part of this hop-up chamber itself, the shell, there's a little slit where the bucking has a little thing protruding from it. It goes through here, this little space for the slit, okay? If this isn't lined up properly, you're going to have problems feeding and you're going to have problems with your hop. Okay, so if the bucking is not in there exactly how it needs to be, you will have issues. I've had them before. It's not a big problem, so long as you take everything back down and work on it again, okay? It actually takes only a few seconds to put in and then check to make sure it's in there, so you might as well do it right now. Now, like I said earlier, there's this little spring piece with the U-shaped plastic piece. You want to make sure you push that in the spring side to avoid jamming on the side. So just take your screwdriver, push that in just a tad, just push it. Okay, once we have that set up, now you got to make sure your slit for your bucking is all lined up properly. If it is not lined up properly, you'll notice it's probably hard to fit in. So what we're going to do is we're just going to screw in just a tad. Not going to go all the way here because we have to check to make sure everything's in place. So put that in there just enough to hold it together. Then I'm going to check inside. Now you should see a complete circle, a nice shaped circle. What happens is if the bucking is not lined up properly, when you look through the chamber and the barrel, you're going to see a kind of like a scrunchy type thing, like, you know, girls putting their hair. It's going to be all scrunched up and it's not going to look anything close to a circle. And what happens is when you try to feed the BB in there, it simply gets jammed, or if it actually even goes through, it'll shoot probably about 100 feet and then pretty much just stop. It'll just drop right down. And if you adjust the hop up, it's not really going to give you any more. It's due to the fact that the BBs can't go through the barrel and bucking properly simply because it's not lined up, okay? So once you get that lined up correctly, have everything in place, you can take this top piece with the 2 screws and stick that into the hop up chamber. Next thing you're going to want to do is simply screw these together. Now you'll notice when you're screwing them, they don't actually ever stop screwing in. They just keep turning and turning and turning. So you'll think maybe they're not going in all the way. Just turn them enough so that they're screwed in. They will keep turning. You just got to make sure they're in there nice and tight as far as they go. I don't know why that don't stop, but not a big deal. Once you have that in, now if you actually have a shim, you can add the shim on top. Highly recommended. Does the job, okay? So we have the shim here. We have the little piece with the hole that goes over the top of the hole of the hop-up chamber, right where the slit of the bucking is. So we slide that over top. Now we take our other screw, our small screw, with the tiny shim on it, and we will put that in. Nice and careful with it. Sometimes it takes a few seconds to set up. Put this in here. Alright, so now she's in. Okay. You're going to tie that down. Now you want it tight, but you don't want it so tight that you can't adjust the hop up. Okay? What happens is if this goes down too tight, your slider piece will not slide back and forth properly. And you want to make sure your shim's pushing down and not up, otherwise it's not going to do the job. Make sure that's nice and tight. There we go, that's better. Okay, so we want to push down on that shim. Make sure it's facing down and doing its job. Got a little paper towel stuck in there, that's alright, got that out. Now when I like to set the hop, I set it about halfway for the time being, just because I don't like setting it all the way to the top and have all that pressure applied on the bucking the whole time. Usually when I'm carrying .3s, it's about halfway, so that's about around where I'll need it when I'm shooting out there on the field. And you'll notice we have a few pieces left over here. Now we got to take our outer barrel and we got to stick that in there. Okay, so we're going to stick it in, and we have to have it lined up so that the piece with the hole here, the slider piece, is on its side. See the piece with the hole? We're going to stick that in there. Might be a tight fit depending on how tight your barrel spacers are. You want them to be tight, but you don't want it to be so tight that you almost feel like you're breaking your hop-up chamber every time you stick it in there. Okay, and so we got to line it up with a hole, make sure that's perfect. Now we can take, actually not this first, this is a common problem, don't stick this in first. Make sure you get this adjuster piece in here. Once we get that on there, we take our little piece here with the shim, and sometimes it'll fall out. These are small pieces. Hands all sweaty, it's pretty hot out here today. Simply take your screw, get your shim lined up. Shim is not 100% necessary, but I stick it on there to make sure everything stays in nice and tight. You want it to be tight, but you don't want it to be so tight that you strip the screws. These screws are pretty dang small, so they're going to be hard to find. So make that about halfway, about where I'll be running that out there on the field. Now we stick in our mag well thing here. Now we tighten this down. Now you're going to want to tighten this down pretty good. Try not to turn it so fast that you might strip the screws. Nice light pressure, but just enough to turn them. Don't want to strip these. What this does is having it nice and tight, nice and firm when you put the magazines in. No misfeeding or anything, so this isn't loose. If it is loose, just tighten it up a bit more. Okay, so do a little test, and that's pretty much good to go. Now you check in here, check in, look through this side to make sure that your bucking is being applied evenly. If you notice there's a piece protruding a little further down than the other side, then you're going to have to go in and realign everything. But from the looks of it, she looks like she's good to go, okay? Make sure everything's nice and tight, and you are ready to install the trigger unit and receiver so that we can put everything back together with the stock, okay? So now we're going to take this, and actually before we do that, you might want to add a little bit of grease around here just so that everything goes in nice and smooth. I've actually already done that. Here, so no need to worry about. And now we turn it. Now the thing with this TM VSR 10 is there is no screw on the receiver that keeps the outer barrel in tight with the receiver. Okay, so that's as tight as it goes, but obviously that's upside down, so we're going to have to turn that out. Now it's going to be a little bit loose, and now most of the clones have a little screw here that keeps the outer barrel nice and tight and won't move. But unfortunately we do not have that on our TM VSR 10, not a huge deal. Just make sure that's lined up as close as you can. We're going to take this here and pop that back in. Now you'll notice the cylinder unit popped out there, so we stick that back in. Okay, so we're going to have to pull the trig. If that happens to you, this is actually good that it happens so I can help some of you guys out. Remember, our spring guide stopper's out, pull the trigger, push in. Okay, and then we got to push this spring guide stopper back into place, and that will pop out like I said earlier if you do not have your trigger guard area in place. Obviously we don't because it's not connected yet. So the spring guide stopper will be caught by the trigger guard and will not push out and cause the cylinder unit to fly out on its own. Alright, so now we have that together. Everything's nice and fitted. Next thing you're going to want to do is take your pins. Move this a little closer to the camera. The longest pin goes in the back, right before the trigger guard. Allen wrenches. Okay. Put this puppy back in here. Make sure this piece is near the receiver is pushed in as far as possible. Get a nice tight fit. Don't want to strip your screws. While they are not Phillips screw heads, which kind of strip a little more easily, these will strip. In fact, the one in front here slightly strips, so I have to be a little more careful with her. Now when you're tightening this up here, the front one is a little tricky. You don't want it to be so tight that you can't get your mag out. So what happens is, put that in there, that's good. What happens is, if you tighten this too much, you'll put your mag in, won't be able to get it out. You'll press this button, it won't work. Okay? You don't want it to be so loose. You don't want it to be so loose here that when you put the mag in, it actually wiggles. And what happens when it wiggles is it causes misfeeds. It won't always feed the right way. It'll dry fire, and that sucks out there on the field. Okay, so you're gonna want to make sure this is tight. And I can't put it in too far that it's hard to get out. So what happens sometimes on the field is I actually have to carry this to make sure it stays in nice and tight. But as of late, I've been able to just keep her in there like that, and she's been able to hold it together for an entire game. What I like to do is take one of my thicker, well, the rubber band just broke. Okay, so, but anyways, what I like to do is take one of my thicker rubber bands. Obviously, this is a thinner one, but the other one just broke. These are pretty old. I've been using them for a while. Take a couple thick rubber bands and I put them right here. Okay, so this allows for the attachment of natural vegetation, but what it also allows for is, once you have your thicker rubber bands here, is keep the outer barrel and receiver together. So if this screw was to loosen up mid-game, rather than have to use this, the rubber bands apply the pressure to keep it together so that the mag stays in nice and tight and doesn't misfeed. Okay, and then after the game you can make sure this is screwed in and everything. Now what you can also do is apply blue Loctite to it to make sure it stays in nice and tight. The only problem with that is I take apart my rifle so much that doing so I would always have to constantly be applying the blue Loctite. It would actually be tougher to remove, so to avoid that hassle I just use the rubber bands. Besides, I'll be using natural vegetation anyways, so that's good to go. Okay, so again, make sure everything's tight, not wiggling, and now your rifle is back together. You're ready to attach your scope. Now, for some of you, you may not be finished. You noticed if you lost this screw, right here, lost the screw, you gotta apply some tape. So we're gonna take some tape here, if I can find the right end. Gonna take a nice long piece here, and we're simply going to put it over top of the hole. Doesn't need to be perfect, a little on the receiver. Okay, so what this does is keeps the receiver in tight. Not sure if you can see it here. I'll get this back in camera view. Just a little bit over the receiver to keep the receiver warping up. What happens is it pops out sometimes, just a tad. This really doesn't help with function so much as keeping all the parts in nice and tight. No wiggling on the field. So now you'll see here, right back, and fire. So everything's in there nice and tight. Got our spring guide stopper held in by the trigger guard. Body pins are in tight, not too tight that our magazine won't feel. Now you're ready to attach your scope. You should know how to do that by now, and you are ready to hit the field.